Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Lannisters and Starks and Baratheons, welcome one and all to iWizard. I'm going to call this segment these chats that I've been hosting about A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm going to call this segment Knights of the Mind. The title there is inspired by Maester Luwin, who tells Jon at one point, I think, that some of the Maesters call themselves Knights of the Mind. So that's what we're going to call this moving forward. Also, heads up, folks at home, this is going to be a spoiler chat, so we are going to talk about the plot. But first, allow me to introduce my special guest. He hails from Dorne. He calls himself just another guy with Wi-Fi. He drinks Dornish wine out of his enemies' skulls. He is known around the brothels and the back alleyways as Muad'Dib Mike. Don't tell his wife. He is the GOAT of BookTube. He is unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Welcome, the birthday boy, Sir Mike Martell.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I do bend the knee to only House Dorne because, you know, there's only house that won't bend the knee. So thank you again for having me. I love talking about this world. Let's anytime you want, man. Just
of course. Awesome. Just start with this then. Let's keep it simple. Please tell me, I know you've done this before on your channel, sure, but tell me and my listeners the story of how you first got into this series, how you came to love it, and your backstory, your love affair with A Song of Ice and Fire, just the whole series in general.
Well, you know, my hipster thing is I was reading this way before anyone knew what it was, but, you know, not really, not anyone, but before it was a pop culture phenomenon. But really, after, you know, rereading Lord of the Rings numerous times, it was around the year 2000. And my roommate was like, do you want to try something besides Lord of the Rings? Like, yeah, sure, I guess. You know, is it better than Shannara? Because that was the only thing else I had really tried. And he said, oh, yeah. So he gives me Wheel of Time. About halfway through book one of Wheel of Time, I was like, yeah, I already read this. It was called Lord of the Rings. Like, do you have anything different? He's like, okay, you think you're ready for it? And he hands me a Game of Thrones. He says, it's basically, imagine Lord of the Rings, but like way more political and way more violent. Okay, sure. You know, why not? I was like 20 at the time. Like, sure, give me all these things. It sounds great. And yeah, at the time, the third book had just come out. It was still on hardcover when I read it, but I read all three of those basically in about 5 days. And just kind of just ate it up. And that's where I've just kind of been a long suffering fan ever since. But, you know, I feel like I've gotten the point to where I can stop pouting about the series not being done and appreciate what we do have, because what we do have is 5 incredible books and arguably the greatest fantasy world ever created, you know, right up there with Tolkien, I think. So, yeah, I've reread the first 3 numerous times, the fourth one a couple of times, and the 5th one only once. So I figured it was time for a reread, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, like, it's not just 5 books, it's 5 really big books, right? And then it is a World of Ice and Fire, and then it is Fire and Blood, and then it is Dunk and Egg, and it is the TV show, and it is, we just have this wealth of information. The maps, what's the book that you just got? Maps of Ice and Fire?
The Lands of Ice and Fire. It's got these huge fold out maps. There's like 10 of them, and some of it just like zooms in, like on King's Landing. It like zooms in on King's Landing. Stuff shows like every single alley. It's crazy.
Novellas and short stories. We've got a lot of this world. And I mean, the funny thing is the people who are complaining, and I get it. Writers are supposed to write, you know, but the guy's in his mid 70s. Okay. And I would say one thing is that imagine that an author produced as much beautiful, you know, enriching, engaging, you know, fantasy literature as George. George is the master. He's the greatest living fantasy author, in my opinion. And imagine that he produced all of this work and then just died. Would we be satisfied with everything that he built and produced? Yes, we would, right? And so it's interesting to me that he didn't die. He just kind of is taking a long time with his next book, and people are still being ungrateful about what he has produced and what is there for us to enjoy. This is the kind of series you can read over and over again and never get sick of it. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, I've been guilty of it too. I make
Yeah.
jokes on the channel all the time. I became quite jaded with it, but once we reread Fire and Blood, I was like, my God, I remember why I love this world so much. Because seriously, the last time I reread it was right before A Dance of Dragons came out. And I like to make the joke that I didn't have kids then, and now they're 10 and 7. You know, so I mean, there's always gonna be those jokes, and sure, I mean, I got as frustrated with anyone as anyone else, and I got kind of just like indifferent. And now upon revisiting it, I'm like, maybe Lord of the Rings isn't my favorite fantasy series all the time. Maybe because I really started thinking about it. I was like, what is my only complaint about the series? It's not done. I mean, is that really a reason for me to say it's not my favorite fantasy series? I mean, really? I mean,
it's that good.
And yeah, for what you said about him being the greatest living fantasy author, it's like before the show came out, the fandom used to call him the American Tolkien. So he had that respect even before that show came out. So yeah, I would love to see him finish a series like Tolkien did. And
and the funny thing is, I think you and I have talked about this before. I think we agree on this, is that if Martin died tomorrow, there'd be a pretty substantial Winds of Winter, right? There'd probably be 1,000-page long book for us to read, even if the ending ended up being clunky, or even if he had to hire Daniel Abram to just finish the book for him, so that it was all wrapped up and he had notes or something like that. We're going to have a 6th book. I think you and I both agree.
Even if it's posthumously, we'll get that 6th book. I think he's been talking about it a lot more recently than he usually has. And I'm always like, I won't believe it until he turns it into the publisher. But he's saying like right now it's like 1,200 pages. So, I don't see that he's got that much more to go before they tell him, okay, can you just roll this into book 7 maybe? So I got to think that it's close enough to where even if he passed away tomorrow, God forbid, that we'd get that posthumously.
They do this all the time, though. Like an author dies, like Michael Crichton dies, and his 1/3 of the way through finished
they keep finding books.
Pirate Latitude and Dinosaur Hunters, or whatever the hell it's called. It's like, you know what? If that's a thing that you can publish, no matter what happens, we're going to get something of Winds of Winter that is going to be very satisfying, I think, for fans. And he's been. I mean, if it's taken this long, I hope he's just luxuriating over every sentence. I hope it's the best Song of Ice and Fire book that we have ever read. Let's just, let's toast to that. Let's toast to that, I think. But as a reader, Mike, as someone who went through it in real time, I'm wondering what it was like to wait for those books. What the agony must have been terrible.
Excruciating. I say that now, there's such a huge fandom now, but at the time when I was reading them, like seriously, you had to go. This is way back when, probably way before you're a youngster, so you probably don't even know here. We used to. I'll
be 35 soon. I'm not a youngster.
We used to use these things called bulletin board systems, message boards, basically on Westeros.org, and basically it would be like me and about 50 other people. And that was really how small it was back then. But, that was all we had. That was the only outlet we had. And it did kind of word of mouth start to pick up a little bit to where, I'd say there was at least a couple thousand users on there before the show even hit. So it was excruciating. I remember the wait for Feast for Dragons was like, okay, because I got to read the first 3. There were people there from the beginning, that
Feast for
had
Crows.
Worse. But it wasn't that. It sucked. It was like basically like a whole high school career. But then, like Dance of Dragons, we were convinced that like it was like Guns N' Roses Chinese Democracy. It was just never going to come out. And then when it did, it was like, okay, well, how about the next one? And looking back on it now, I'm like, that wait for Dance of Dragons wasn't even that bad compared to this. So,
right.
Yeah, it's been rough, but rereads are great. Is this a reread or is this your first read?
No, this is a reread. This is my first reread.
Oh, okay. First reread. So yeah, I think that you can see there's so much stuff. And I've had so many people be like, yeah, I read it and then I watched the show. I don't really see another reason. And I'm like, well, I can tell you all kinds of them. I'm seeing all kinds of stuff that I don't recall, or I think that over time I'd start to make the show a little bit more canon in my head, because I always joke that I feel like I've forgotten more about this world than a lot of people ever knew. Yeah. So I'm having to be like, oh, that's exactly how it was. The show kind of changed that a little bit. And that's kind of, penetrated my memory there.
Who's popping in here? What's going on?
Oh, we got a mystery night.
Hey, how's that? How's it going, guys?
I didn't know we had a secret guest. All right, I like it.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in. Jordan was nice enough to let me know that he's doing this with you. And I just wanted to pop on and kind of just wish you a happy birthday. Nice. And wish you well now that you're super old. And I just wanted to say, First of all, huge congrats on 75K. I know that you guys, you're probably going to be at 100 by the end of the year, and that just blows my mind.
That blows my mind.
Yeah, and I know that I speak for myself, and now I can say tens of thousands of other people, which is insane. That, you know, your enthusiasm for books has gotten us through what I think was a really dark kind of 2 years with the pandemic. You got a lot of us reading again. Your content kind of just kept a lot of us going and stuff. And so I want to thank you for that. And I always look forward to your videos. I look, you know, I watch your videos in the morning when I'm getting ready for work, and it's like I'm having a coffee with a buddy, and I'm glad to be able to call you one. And so I just wanted to hop on and wish you a happy birthday and say thank you for the content. Thank you for the community. Thank you for the relationships and stuff that you've granted all of us. And I just wanted to wish you well. So that's it. That's all I got.
Speechless. Thank you so much. That's really awesome.
Thanks,
hey,
guys.
Did you read the book yet?
Which book?
Oh,
that one. Yeah, no, I haven't. I'm reading that in January. I'm doing a first read.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, did he read this in secret? I didn't know. Okay.
No, and that's why I'm only coming on for a brief period of time because I can't. No spoilers. So
okay. Well, as someone who's very, very old, I have no problem saying, you know, thank you, and beard goals someday, maybe when I'm a grown boy. I can have the Riker beard like Theo, but thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Theo.
Take care. Bye, guys.
What's up, guys?
What's
Hey.
How's it going? Happy birthday, Mike. I know it's tomorrow, but I figured I'd stop in and say happy birthday.
Oh, well,
thanks for showing up, man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have my version of Game of Thrones here because I figured the Game of Thrones discussion, I'd at least show my copy.
Seen that one before. That's nice.
Oh, yeah, this is the one that, like, just prior to the launch of the comic book. So it's got some of the comic strip in the back. So this is an old out-of-date one that they don't make.
Okay. I think
anymore.
I've got, if you don't count Kindle, I got 4 versions now. So, you know, and
I actually just yesterday bought the UK illustrated edition, the one that looks like super fancy. I saw you talking in your weekly update with your folio, and I got jealous, but I was unwilling to spend $200.
Me too. Someone sent that to me. Yeah. See?
Oh, Jordan's flexing.
Yeah. Trust me.
I don't have big muscles, so this is the only way I can actually flex.
They've got 4 of them out, and I looked at it, and like, if I wanted to just get the next 3, it'd literally be over $1,000 shipped, and I was like, no, I can't. So.
I can't do it. But like for $120, I can get the illustrated editions and that nice UK version.
Those are nice. Those are very nice.
I say we get a Kickstarter going for Mike's dream, his biggest dream of all time, which is to get all of the Folio Society Song of Ice and Fire books. I think
send me plenty of nice things. I'm happy with that. But thank you for the thought.
I mean, honestly, we could probably just start a slush fund.
Yeah.
That way he can get all the James Bonds. He can get all of the the Folio Game of Thrones.
I need to buy like some extra square feet for my room because it's getting crunched.
You got to pull the Brian Lee Durfee. You got to let go of the knackage up top and get those shelf extenders.
Right. Brian Lee Durfee's house is like a library, man.
I mean, dude, that man has got beautiful book collection.
Yeah, you and Mike have game for sure. But I've seen Brian Lee Durfee's like, you know, bookshelf tour, and it's kind of like this labyrinthine, like he's got books everywhere, and it's just like he'll just pull out like, you know, originals from the 80s of like, you know, whatever it is. You know,
because he buys them in collection.
I know.
He buys the whole collection. He's like, yeah, I bought 100 books off of eBay and I found them in pristine condition, and let's reorganize my bookshelves. Don't mind my house. I can't walk anywhere because I got too many books. Hey, is this camera on?
Off of this idea, I just donated a ton of books to the local prison because I would have never even thought to do that if not for him. That was a great.
I'm glad Ember Blade made the cut.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know when I'm going to read that. You know, Madison's like, oh yeah, it's a quick read. I'm like, it's like 1,100 pages. You mean it's a quick listen? No, it's not a quick read. It's a quick listen.
It's a good read though.
I'm sure it is. But you know, I got to do stuff like reread, you know, Song of Ice and Fire for the 400th time. Come on.
Yeah, this was an impulse thing because you got the folio, right?
I literally was just going to read the Joe Abercrombie introduction. Next thing I knew, I was on page 50. I guess I'm going to keep going. So you get that Westeros itch, man. It just doesn't go away.
Well, I need to I've only read half of the first book. And well, then so it's time for me to jump back into Westeros, especially with the new show coming out.
Definitely.
I'm a huge Matt Smith fan. So like he's still one of my favorite doctors.
People were giving Matt Smith a hard time before this, and I told him, I'm writing this down. He's going to crush it. And all the things I'm hearing from that first episode is that he is the standout. I told you, the guy's an awesome actor.
Listen, I'm going to watch that show, but if they pull a Sean Bean, and like I'm gonna be so mad because
all I'll tell you, Andrew, is that if a Targaryen lives over 30, things are really going well.
Don't read Fire and Blood.
I'm not going to.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of fun to watch a show without knowing what's going to happen. But
yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to hop in and say happy birthday. I don't really have a whole lot to add to a Game of Thrones
I appreciate
discussion.
I hope that baby's letting you sleep, my man.
He's getting there.
I hit the baby lottery. Both my kids slept like rocks. It was great. But I got the luggage under the eyes anyway. So.
This is the face of pure jealousy.
Well, mine are also 10 and 7, so I'm a little jealous.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for
having me, Jordan.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it from one wizard to another.
The wizards.
Yep. Subscribe to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and it's great content. And
we're gonna be talking about The Stand soon. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Yes, I got to get that thumbnail and everything set up, but we will be talking about that soon. So that's gonna be fun.
Can't wait.
Thanks for stopping by.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
No more surprises, are there?
Oh, you don't even know, dude.
Oh, okay.
So we were talking about our backstories with Song of Ice and Fire, and I guess for me it's very different from yours. For me, the journey didn't actually start until after the show came out. So again, for the 100th time, I came late to fantasy everything. I'm not like you. You came out of the womb reading Stephen King.
No. See that, but I'm not a gatekeeper with stuff like that. To me, it's like I see this like with sports teams. Like you didn't watch a team when they were losing 100 games a year, so you're not allowed to root for them.
I appreciate that.
To be into something.
Yeah, you have a great attitude about it, and I appreciate that. But I'm just being honest. Like I don't have the background that you have. One of the great things about your show, one of the things you do really well, Nikki and I were just talking about this, is because you're so experienced, because you've read so much, and because you've been reading the stuff for so long. You were talking about the forum chats that you were on, because you've been doing this for so long. When you do a book review, when you have a discussion, you have a million reference points that I don't have. I have my classics and I have my philosophy, and then I read these fantasy books for the first time, and I'm like, okay, well, I can talk about that. I don't have your fantasy clout, so I have to reach for other influences. But for me, I didn't start. My journey didn't start until after the show came out. I had already been reading fantasy literature, but I hadn't read a word of this series. And then when the show came out, I was like getting curious. I was like, okay, they make a lot of TV shows about books, and sometimes the books aren't very good. Like when Shannara came out, that was when I was like, oh, wow, I should read, the Shannara Chronicles. And we've talked about this before. I have a lot of respect for Terry Brooks, but when I read the Shannara Chronicles, I was a little bit underwhelmed, despite my respect for Terry Brooks. So I was curious because I'd seen these books for a while at like Barnes and Noble. And for some reason, the covers of the books with the sword and the helmet and the chalice, and I think one of them has a shield on it, it just made me feel like they were military fantasy or war novels. So for a bunch of years, I was reading fantasy, but I would go to Barnes and Noble and I just didn't pick the books up because I guess I was expecting that they were like David Gemmell or like Bernard Cornwell or something like that, which I think that stuff is really cool now. But at the time I was looking for beautifully written kind of Tolkien, Le Guin, epic fantasy stuff like that. Dune. I was just looking for like really beautifully written literary fantasy. And I would just walk by that series every time and I would never pick it up. And I guess I just didn't know what it was. Then when I watched the show, I was like, oh my God, the show is so good that I guarantee you, if the show is anything like the books, if the script is based on the books, I'm going to love these books. And what happened, Mike, was this was when I was in New York, and my wife, NIKKI, who is a professor now, she was getting her PhD, she was getting her doctorate at Cornell. And here I am, I sound like Andy Bernard. My wife went to Cornell. But I was living, I was living in upstate New York. Cornell is in the middle of nowhere. Ithaca, New York is like 6 hours away from everything anyone could want to ever visit or see. And so I was in the middle of upstate New York, and I had an hour commute to work because it's so difficult to find jobs up there that are near you because everything's so spread out, and everyone who is a teacher teaches at these schools for, a very long time. So I got this job. I had an hour commute, and I started listening to Game of Thrones. And I fell in love, and I know this is controversial, both with Roy Dotrice and his narrations. I know his flaws. He goes Joffrey, Jeffrey, and if you ever heard his narration of Theon Greyjoy's voice, it's like a 90-year-old man. But I fell in love with it. And then I just kept going because I had this really long commute, and people would ask me, like, how do you stand an hour-long commute? That's ridiculous. Who would ever drive that far just to get to work? And I was like, well, I'm listening to Game of Thrones. I'm listening to Song of Ice and Fire. Like, this is no big deal. Like, I'm enjoying myself. Let me ask you, let's get to the big question, Mike, and we may have to cut you off. What makes A Song of Ice and Fire so great? As a series in general, I know we're talking about a Game of Thrones, and we'll get to that specifically, but just why should people read the series in general, Mike, and go on this journey?
Well, I mean, I think the modern audiences now are probably used to a lot of these things, but when this came out, I think about the second to last Arya chapter in this book, which just kind of like changed fantasy for me, where it was like, okay, no one is safe. And you always heard, oh, no one's safe. And then you turn out everyone's safe. And this wasn't just like, oh, no, we're not just got a bunch of red shirts. We're talking major, serious, maybe the main character of this book. Yeah. And
so the second to last Arya chapter, just for listeners at home, you're talking about the scene where Arya is in the crowd on the run, clasping desperately to Needle as she's watching her father, Ned, get his head chopped off.
And it was one of those things where I was like, okay, well, we didn't actually see the body. And in the very next chapter, they're talking about him having his head cut. I was like, oh, well, okay, never mind. So my bargaining lasted. Actually, it lasted a little longer because the first time I read that, I actually threw the book across the room and then ran over and grabbed it to pick it up to finish it. But I'd never, the darkest thing I seen was Boromir getting filled with arrows in Lord of the Rings, So at that time, it was like, okay, just change it. But overall, the series, it's about the characters. I mean, I think that no one does politics quite this way because everything I'd ever read political in any kind of setting, it was just boring. Like I said on my channel, it's like reading what you would see on C-SPAN. It's just so boring. And this, it's like every single time, kind of made me think about like every scene almost was like that dinner scene in Dune, where you always feel like,
yes,
anyone could jump up and stab you in the face right now.
Yeah,
it was like literally no one was safe. But yeah, just the characters are just memorable. And I think he was the only one that could take it where like, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. And I didn't want to see anybody get stabbed. I wanted all the characters to live, or I wanted them all to die, one or the other, so there was no clear cut, morally black or morally white characters. Everyone was just kind of realistic. And I had not seen that in fantasy up to that point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I also I think it's worth mentioning, one of the things that makes Song of Ice and Fire really distinctive is that the books are really character focused. Each chapter is told from a different character's perspective, and you get to see the world through the characters' heads. And everything is so intimate. Everything that happens is tinged with the characters' thoughts and concerns and feelings. But I'll just say that one of the things I think Martin does so well is he gives readers a full cast of nuanced characters, compelling, believable characters who are fleshed out, multidimensional, and he puts them in a fantasy world that just feels completely real. Interesting politics. The characters have rich inner lives and nuanced feelings and authentic personalities. You ever read one of those fantasy novels, Mike, where all of the characters seem to have the same personality?
Oh yeah.
And you can't tell them apart?
Yeah. It's no fun.
No, and you get like you could get a sentence into a chapter of Game of Thrones, and you could cover up the name because Martin titles each chapter with the name of the person whose perspective it's from. And one sentence in, and you'd know who it is. Yeah. You know, if it was from Catelyn's perspective, she would be, you know, thinking sort of like sorrowfully about something she's worried about with one of her kids, you know, and with Bran, it would be something, he'd be escaping into his imagination, and he'd be like trying to figure out who he is now that he's been injured and all of that. It's just, he's so good at characterization. None of, as you pointed out, none of these characters are entirely bad. I guess maybe Ramsay Bolton and possibly Joffrey are like entirely bad, but most of these characters are not entirely bad or good. Some of them have warm hearts, but they're just selfish. Some of them are greedy, but they also have someone they truly love, and you can see the good in them too. Some of them are just doing what they think is right, and that's maybe not what you or I would think is right, but they all have cogent, believable motivations. Yeah, and that's
one truly good guy character in the story, and he doesn't make it out of the first book. So like anyone else that you think might be considered like a good guy, they do really detestable things all through the series, you know. So
I know, and that's one of Martin's points, is that it's so Machiavellian, and that's Machiavelli's brilliance, is that it would be nice if you could be a good man. And we all like good people, good, noble, honorable, valorous people. But we live in reality, and reality is a certain way. And if you're really good all the time, you might not be able to protect your children. And if you can't protect your children, are you really a good man? And so these are really complicated questions that I think Martin explores with grace and aplomb. Okay, we have here again. Hello.
Oh, okay. Hey.
Can you see me this time?
Yeah, we got you. Hey, Sarah.
I like you.
Hey.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Awesome.
Did I crash an important question?
Not at all. Not at all.
You told me this was your 30th birthday stream, Mike. Is that true?
If only. Thank you. Yeah.
Is today your birthday? Today?
Tomorrow will be my birthday. But you know, like I try to tell people, it's just another day when you're this old. I'm just going to work tomorrow.
Well, I'm posting this video tomorrow, so yes, today is his birthday. Yes.
Excellent. Awesome. So you guys are talking about Game of Thrones, just the first book, or
just the first book?
Just the first book, but
we're kind of talking about the whole series.
Yeah, we're kind of talking about the whole series. Sarah, so why don't you tell me, if you have like a minute, have you read you've read the series?
I actually haven't read it all. So I only read the first 3 books because I had hoped that would end like a mini arc. And then when the other books came, I would do the next arc, and that point has not come yet. So I think I'll probably just go ahead and read the other 2, but I want to read them over. So I'll start again at 1, but I read the first 3 and I gave them all 5 stars because they're all excellent. I didn't not continue on to A Feast for Crows, but is it A Feast for Crows?
Yeah, Feast for Crows.
Because I didn't like them. It was just that I thought, okay, well, this is a good pausing point, and then I'll continue.
Storm has a good, if you want to stop, it's a pretty good place, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but I really like them. I think that they're excellent.
Well, come on, be irresponsible. Just start rereading them now.
That's true. I should. That's what everybody seems to be doing right now.
It's not.
I gotta say, looking at your like folio edition makes me want to buy those. And
well, that was the thing. I never even meant to read it, but I opened it, looked at it, and next thing I knew, I was reading it. Okay, so yeah, it's got magical powers as well. So.
That one's not in the background. Was that too? You didn't want to?
No, I put it away because I didn't want my kids to ruin it or to spill something on it. So if I'm not reading it, I put that one back on the shelf when I'm done with it. But this was my first hardcover of it. So you know.
I'm impressed if you let your children into that room. Like I would keep it locked.
With my oldest, that works. With my youngest, you don't tell him to do anything. You tell him not to. He does it anyway, and and you try not to kill him.
You follow behind and contain the chaos.
He's the tornado. Yeah. Yeah. He's the shaggy dog of my dire wolves. Yeah.
That makes sense. Awesome. Cool. Am I allowed to listen to you guys talk for a minute, or do you want me to pop back out, or what are we doing?
Join in, Sarah. So tell me, you read the first 3 books. What did you like about the books? Why are, I mean, you gave them all 5 stars. Why is Song of Ice and Fire great? That was the last question that I asked him, is that we both feel like it's a really great fantasy series. Martin is my favorite modern fantasy author. And so what did you find compelling or enjoyable or edifying about the series?
What I liked about Game of Thrones, and what I still like about it, is that George R.R. Martin is one of the only people that I have read who has managed to make me believe that all, or at least almost all, of the point of views are equally interesting. I struggle sometimes with multi-POV fantasy because I think that some storylines are really, really good, and then I feel so irritated when I'm reading the other characters. Yeah. But I didn't ever feel that way when I was reading Game of Thrones, because he makes them all compelling. And I think it's just because he writes really good characters, and his dialogue is great. He really makes the characters come to life, and he's working against a lot with me because I'm not the hugest grimdark fan. Like I like more classic fantasy, and like I said, I prefer a single point of view to multi-POV, but he's just that good. Like there's no, you can like or dislike Game of Thrones, but I don't think that you can say that he's not a talented fantasy author. I think that's just disingenuous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add to that, Sarah, I also think Martin is a master at something that you see most often in literary fiction. And I'm with you, Sarah. I'm not the hugest like grimdark fan. Just in and of itself, I don't need everyone to be morally gray. I do sometimes like to have heroes, and I do sometimes want an ideal to look up to. And so it's not grimdark in and of itself. It's the fact that Martin kind of mixes sour with sweet. There is a lot of brutality, but there's also so much beauty. But one of the things Martin is also, I think, good at is it's again something you see in literary fiction, which is when the narration of the story is third person, but it still feels completely subjectively oriented, right? Because there are some stories where there is clearly this neutral narrator telling the story. The main character did this, the supporting character said that, isn't life unfair, she thought. Whereas really good writers, and I know this is something Philip Chase talks about a lot, and I think he's talked about the fact that Joe Abercrombie is really good at this. Really good writers have this impressive ability to bend the narration so that it reflects the unique voice of each of the characters. So it's like third person limited narration in this, but you still feel like it's first person, like you're in Catelyn's head. Actually, I was talking to Philip Chase the other day, and he said that AP Canavan told him that this is called internal focalization, which is the most pretentious thing ever, but he's right. And as an English teacher, I should know this, but I didn't know this. And that's when you're writing from like the third person perspective, but you're bending that third person perspective and having it imitate the voice of the characters, which is good writing. Like when you read like a literary author like Joyce Carol Oates or John Updike or whatever, that's what they're doing. So Martin is like making fantasy literature legitimate for me. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I agree.
Literature, the capital
L. One thing that he does really, really well is describe food, because holy hell, if I'm not hungry reading these books.
Also true. And he writes a great animal companion, which we can all appreciate.
My favorite. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like that I like that he pulls from history. Like clearly that's something that inspired him. And I like fantasy that feels like historical fiction. Obviously, Philip. Hi.
I was gonna say who? I don't know this name. Okay. What's up, my man?
How are you?
Just living the dream, baby. Just living the dream.
All right. Well, I'm here to say happy birthday. I'm using my wife's computer, so you're seeing her name there, but trying to change the name here. It's not letting me. But
right. That was good. That was stealthy. That it masked your
stealthy. Appearance. You didn't know who it was. Yeah.
I'll take care of it.
George about has someone here I've never talked to. Awesome. Yeah.
All right. So, I'm going to allow Philip to have his turn now, and I will bow out gracefully. But happy birthday, Mike. I'm really glad that I could say that, and thank you for letting me come on.
Of course.
I'll talk to you soon. We're going to talk about The Stand, right?
Yes, it's going to be fun.
Outstanding. I like your haircut.
Thank you. See
Good to
ya.
see you, Sarah. So, happy birthday, man.
Thanks, buddy. You know, when we get our age, it's just another day, right? I'm going to work tomorrow. So,
Well, in my case, because I'm also a Leo, as you know, it's kind of this August is a kind of a big one.
Oh, is it the big one?
It's a big one.
It's the black bowling ball one, the black cannonball one. Okay. Right.
I mean, this stuff in the beard here, it's there for a reason, I guess, right?
So, yeah, it's pretty soon you have to shave your head like mine.
35, right, Philip?
35. That's what I meant by big one. Yeah, 35.
Oh, that's great.
No, it starts with a 5. There's a 5 in it, but it's the first number, not the second.
Philip, man, you look so good for your age. Like when I'm your age, Philip, I'm going to look like Maester Aemon. Okay. and the thing is that I'm turning 35 in like a month, and you already look like you're turning 35. So that's just great.
Bullshit, isn't it?
It's just great for my self-esteem.
Well, I could be Jaime Lannister, maybe, huh?
Yeah.
Just stay away from sisters.
Yeah.
You've read these, right, Philip?
Oh my goodness, yeah, of course. I've read the entire series twice, and the first book actually, because I taught it in my fantasy novels course. I read it.
God, why weren't there awesome professors like this when I was in school? They were like, "No, you've got to read fucking Pride and Prejudice."
Right.
It's a great book.
Just saying.
It's a good book too, but I have to say, probably my students did enjoy A Game of Thrones more than Pride and Prejudice. I would venture to guess. But yeah, I've taught it probably 5 times at least. So yeah.
You guys start like broadcasting these classes, because I've watched.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we're doing here on BookTube, I guess, right?
I guess so. I mean, when it comes to like grading papers, though, I'll leave that to you. I got to do enough when I got to help my wife. That's enough for me. So
yeah, that's a good part of BookTube. No papers to grade, right? So
hey, get excited though. School starts back soon.
Oh, Mike.
My wife is
Mike.
I always tell her, she's like, "Oh, I wish I got 4 weeks of vacation a year." I was like, "You get like 12 weeks of vacation a year. Shut up."
Yeah.
All right. So Philip, do you have time for one question? Maybe you could kick us off here.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Because you've taught this book so many times, you read the series like twice. And when we talked on earlier, Philip, a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me, you teach this, used to teach this with your fantasy novels class. So why don't you start? A Game of Thrones, the first book of Song of Ice and Fire. What makes this novel such a great book one for a fantasy series, Philip?
Ooh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can name quite a few things, really. I love George Martin's prose to begin with. And I know it's not always the most popular topic, but you wouldn't have the story without the prose. And I do think that George Martin is a great example of a modern fantasy author who exhibits what Ursula Le Guin was talking about in her essay From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, in that he transports you to another world through this prose. He establishes this is not our world. It's archaic, but Martin pulls it off really well. It's not awkwardly archaic. It's not off-putting. It's not difficult. It's really smooth prose. And so I think he does a great job of building his world through that language that he uses in there. That's one thing I give him absolute kudos for. The other thing that I loved about it when I first read it, and this is fairly standard now in fantasy, but is the multiple POV thing where, you got a chapter, you got a POV character, and then the next chapter is a different POV character. And so the switching
everybody's doing
POV,
it now, but
yeah, it's pretty commonplace now, but I think when he was doing it, it wasn't so much so, but he does it so well. And that's another thing that really keeps the readers absolutely, interested, because, there are so many great characters. And speaking of which, that's another thing he does really well, is he's a great character builder. I mean, who else could kill off so many characters that are so wonderful? And then just, the guy can just pull out a few more good ones. So, I mean, he's got really, in a very short space, he's able to give you a great, strong sense of a character. So there's another great strength of this series.
He was the first author I saw that could take a character and be like, I'm going to make this one do something completely irredeemable, and then he'll find a way to redeem it. Like,
yeah.
who is cheering for Jamie at the beginning? Fucking nobody, right?
Nobody.
Look what he does. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
He does it with numerous characters in the series too.
Yep. And the stakes are high, because he does. I mean, that he won't hesitate to kill off beloved characters, right?
Oh, so he gets power off of it. So
yeah, about squeezing our poor hearts.
So George, you can kill Tyrion in the beginning of book 6. That way you have the energy to finish book 7, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, going off of what you were talking about, man, I was thinking about exactly that. I finished my reread about 2 hours ago, and I was thinking about how when the story was told from Catelyn's perspective, when we were getting Robb's battles as he's marching south on the west side of the Green Fork, and his other army is on the east side of the Green Fork, and that whole experience with Walder Frey and all that, when all of that was happening, as they're staring at the maps and as Catelyn's worrying about her son, I was rooting for Robb. Then it would transition to Tyrion, and Tyrion is leading his new war band, and he's dealing with his father, and Tyrion is fighting valiantly in battle despite the disadvantages that he has in terms of engaging in combat and his courage and his bravery. I was rooting for Tyrion. So it's a battle where you want both sides to win, and that's the mark of a good novel.
Very hard to do.
That's the mark of a good novel, when an author is able to do that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's a great observation, actually, about how invested we are in those characters, and that's a sign of how great he is at building up
book
character.
1.
Yeah, and that's in book 1.
A lot of authors can't do that. Like, they'll try to have the big shocking moments in a book 1. Now I'm like, I don't even know the character. Why am I supposed to feel upset?
Yep. Yeah, so those are just a few things I think that he does brilliantly. And you could go on.
Do you get hungry when you're reading these books because of how he describes food?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guy. Okay, there's another thing that he's really, I think, a hallmark of Martin's writing is he did his homework. I mean, this series and just even this first book, you can see that he knows through and through the 14th and 15th century history of particularly England. So there's a lot of reflection of the Wars of the Roses, for example, and the 100 Years' War in these books. So not that he's trying to go beat for imitate the exact culture, but there's a lot that comes from that. Yes. And it feels authentic. A lot of it feels very authentic because he's really done his research. So yeah. And
Machiavelli, Wars of the Roses, even when you go back and read Fire and Blood, you can tell he's learned about William the Conqueror and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you ever watch an interview with him, he'll make references to numerous things outside of War of the Roses. Even he's talking about one recently. He was on, I think, Game of Owns podcast, and he was talking about his inspiration for the Red Wedding and talking about it. And I was just like, wow. So it's real historical events that he gets this stuff from. But it's, like you said, it's not a copy. He's just, hey, I got an idea after listening to that, so it's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And it was funny. My wife made a comment too, and she said that it's the mark of a good book that when you read a book a second time, the author genuinely makes you feel like it might not happen this time. You know what I mean? Like that the bad thing that you're dreading might not actually happen. You know intellectually that it's going to happen, but you're so immersed in the world, you're so attached to the characters that you feel like it isn't inevitable. Like there might be a change this time. Like Eddard might just get out of it this time.
I was going to say that this is the 6th or 7th time I've reread this book, and I'm like, no, Ed, do this and everything will work out. You know how this ends, man. Yeah, so.
What are you doing, Ned? What are you doing? Don't do it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I had all of those feelings, and I also think it's worth mentioning Martin's ability as a world builder. The world building in Song of Ice and Fire, and especially because you have to do the most world building in book 1 of your fantasy series. You know this, Philip.
Yeah.
The world building, what I like is that it isn't separate from the characters. It's not like Martin does character work and then gives you some info dump to build the world. The world is built through the characters, whether it's the Starks or Daenerys or Tyrion or Jon up north in the Night's Watch. There's a great Philip, you might have heard of this. There's a great John W. Campbell quote to the old editor, John W. Campbell, who was the editor for Astounding Magazine. And he actually wrote, you ever watched The Thing? John Carpenter's The Thing. He was the person who wrote the novella for that. It was called Who Goes There? And his maxim was, make the marvelous seem mundane, and the mundane will seem marvelous. And so his principle that he came up with was he wouldn't accept a story that would just sit down and explain to you, oh, this world is really cool. Gee whiz, flash bang. There's all this really cool stuff. And here's my unique fantasy or sci-fi world. John W. Campbell had this principle that he said the characters wouldn't think like that. So you can't write it like that. They would wake up in the morning and they would, instead of taking a shower, they'd go through the cleansing ray and they'd go through the matter transformer or whatever. And they'd, get into their flying car, but they wouldn't think like, oh, isn't it cool that I'm in a flying car? Because that would be mundane for you if you lived in that world. Martin seems to be really good at doing that as well, is making the marvelous seem mundane. You have John, you have this gigantic wall that we would just be sitting back and going, oh my God, look at the size of that thing. And, the people who man that wall are just like, yeah, whatever, it's the wall, so.
To me, it's like, it's cold. Can we go? Like, I'm from Winterfell and I think it's too cold here. That means it's too cold.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that comes to mind when talking about Martin and his characters, and one reason why they're so compelling, is he's really good at introducing conflict within his characters. In fact, there's a famous quote by William Faulkner that a lot of people think belongs to George R.R. Martin, because Martin, I think, has quoted it, but it's about, there's nothing, something to the, it means something like, there's nothing worth writing about but the human heart in conflict with itself, right? And we've all heard that quote, and some people attribute it to George Martin mistakenly, but it's a William Faulkner quote. But Martin absolutely delivers on that principle in here. Are we talking spoilers or offer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
For book one. Okay. Yeah. So there are, even in a character like Jaime Lannister, who clearly he seems like a pure villain in this, but there you can see there's some hesitation when he's called upon, the famous, the things I do for love, right? I mean, he doesn't want to do that. But he feels compelled to do that to keep the secrecy, to, for his family's ambitions. There's all this stuff that is clearly going on in his head that spells out, I have to do this thing that I really don't want to do, and there are just so many examples of that. Jon Snow, feeling like part of the family, part of the Starks, but obviously not, because he's the bastard and Catelyn doesn't like him. And that whole decision about, going to the wall and all that is not something I think that he's completely embraced. He's conflicted about it. So every single character you can see, he builds a sense of conflict into, and that's deliberate, and it's brilliantly done.
So you're a Caitlin person, and he's a Catelyn person. Me, it's just however it comes across that time. I'll say it differently. My wife argued about the other night. She's like, I said, because Littlefinger always calls her Cat. So I was like, it's probably Catelyn. She's like, there's people named Kate that you call Catelyn. I was like, I guess I don't know any Kates, so I don't know if I would do that. But
well, you're in good company, because Roy Dotrice calls her something different every single time he mentions her.
Surprised you stayed awake that long.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Philip. And and it's interesting, his characterization. Martin, his characters, all of them are outcasts in a different way.
Yeah.
So you have Jon Snow, the bastard, who is hated by his, whatever it is, his, half mother, stepmother, whatever.
Stepmother, I guess.
Yeah, his stepmother. He's hated by Catelyn. He feels like an outsider. He has to join the Night's Watch, when really he has just as much metal as his brothers, and as much worth. You have Tyrion, the imp, as he's called, and he has to deal with his status kind of as an unloved son and as an outcast, and as even his father is referring to him as a deformity. You have Daenerys, who's this like very marginalized figure. She is cast out. She is part of the old guard. and she's, you know, abused by her brother and married off to this horse lord and all of that stuff, and she has to fight her way up. And you have Jamie, who, I don't want to make him sound like a victim, because he's like this perfect looking guy who engages in incest and kills people all the time. But but even he has his own redemption story and stuff like that. And so like every single character has a chip on their shoulder. You have Varys, who is a eunuch, but he has a lot to say as well, and he seems to have his own sense of the summum bonum, right, of a kind of higher good, even though he's very Machiavellian. You have Petar Baelish, Littlefinger, who is absolutely in love with. Everyone's got a chip on their shoulder. Everyone is, you know, kind of downtrodden in a different way, or that sort of thing. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Not only
Sansa, who loves Joffrey until she doesn't.
Yeah, that's a good example, actually. It really is. And there's this actually affects the reader too, of course, because not only are the characters conflicted, but we're conflicted in how we view them, because we like Caitlin or Catelyn or whatever we call her. We like her most of the time, except when she's mean to Jon Snow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we feel conflicted about the characters as well. So yeah,
she's a brilliant character who deeply cares about her children.
Discord was saying how much they hated her, and I'm like, besides the way she treated John, I was like, I don't think she does anything that any other parent wouldn't do if their kid got flung out a window. Right. You know, so.
That, and you know, she is protecting her children even in that hatred of Jon Snow. And I mean, you think about it, she believes that he's a product of her husband's infidelity too. So that's got to hurt.
Right.
So yeah, you think about her position, and the longer you think about it, you think, well, yeah, I mean, I kind of get that. I mean, I like Jon Snow and I feel horrible the way she treats him, but I kind of get where she's coming from.
You get that she shouldn't be mad at Jon Snow. She should be mad at her husband if she thinks that's what he did. But rage, the whole, you know, tautologically, the point of rage is that it's not rational. And she can't take it out on her husband. That's a kind of cognitive dissonance. She has to take it out on Jon. But guys, I was going to say this, and I wonder what you thought of this. I was going to say that I was going to call this something that I didn't like about my reread, but now I think I'm going to say that it's something that was done really well. And it is so agonizing for me as a fan of the Starks. And it's just watching Ned Stark come undone again for the second time. And that it was agonizing. When you do a reread, I was mentioning this to Mike, it feels like it happens in slow motion. And you realize, if you've read Machiavelli, or if you've read like any like political philosopher going back to like the ancient Greeks, you just know how naive Ned is politically, because he's got these stern Northern values. Every wrong move you can make, as I said to Mike the other day, he makes in this situation. The idea that once you've caught Cersei giving birth to her brother's children, that what you should then do while you're injured and Robert is hunting is invite her to the Godswood and reveal everything that you know. Remember, Ned has no friends in court. He has no one he can trust. He makes no allies. Nobody likes him, but he's going to schedule a meeting with Cersei.
Bond, where they'll sit there and tell James Bond their exact plan. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah. But it's interesting though, because it's so relevant to our world today. Let's look at our own politics. How many politicians do super well when they tell the truth to people?
I don't know. When they start telling the truth, I'll let you know.
You're done. I know.
But it's interesting, because often I feel like, anyway, politicians feel like they can't tell the truth, because if they do, they'll get punished for it. And that's how messed up our politics are, unfortunately. But so Ned is the equivalent of a politician who just tells the truth to everybody. And unfortunately, in the Machiavellian world around him, that's not going to get him very far, you know.
But something I brought up with the Starks in book one is, and see if you feel the same way. I feel like what the Starks are in book one is, I'm going to take a traditional fantasy family and I'm going to drop them in Westeros. This is why they wouldn't survive, because, you know, there's a line that John says to Rob in the book, says, "You Starks are hard to kill," and I'm like, read forward a little bit, my man. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's exactly how it feels like. This is a traditional fantasy house that you're kind of used to in every other fantasy that you've ever read, but they're in a much different world now, and you're going to see why there aren't very many houses like that in this world.
Yeah, it's a wonder that honor survives anywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And you know what? Yeah, I love that you're honorable, but you know what? If you're a hand of the king, I'm sorry, you can't be doing this stuff that you're doing, my man. So yeah. Great man, not so great a hand of the king, I don't think.
At least he was wise enough, though, to know that he would be terrible at it. He didn't really want to do it, right?
Well, I mean, even at the end of the book, when he tries, he could go along with Littlefinger and okay, let's get the City Watch on our side. Let's do this. So even when he tries to cut corners a little bit, he fails at it.
I know. It's so utterly agonizing. Just the entire time, the idea that he thought it was a good idea to schedule a meeting with Cersei to tell her that when Robert gets back from his hunt, that you and Robert are going to come after her, that she should hide on some island far away if she wants to get away from Robert's wrath. This is quite possibly the worst politicking I've ever heard of or read about anywhere.
He knows that she threw his kid out of a window, and I can reason with these people. Come on.
I know. And
I won't call him dumb. I've heard some people like, oh, he's just dumb. It's like, no, he's dumb. It's just he's honorable to a damn fault. He's a good person.
So incredibly stupid. No, he's honorable to a fault, obviously. But what good is your honor, again, if you can't protect your children? And one difference with the show is that, well, first of all, that discussion takes place in the Godswood. And if I remember right, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it takes place in the Godswood.
It's just right in King's Landing out there in the court.
Yeah. Which only serves to like aid Ned's sense of honor and principle, because he says this before he like reveals this to her, that he feels the gods in there with him. Another difference from the show is that Cersei actually comes on to Ned in the book.
Oh, and it's weird.
Yeah, she actually she's like, my brother is away, and she can make this worth his while, and that two people that are once enemies can actually become friends, and that if he just allies with her, his children will be safe, and he'll be a solid hand for the realm, and this partnership will be good for the realm and peace and both of them. And I'm not saying Ned should ally with Cersei. That woman is a snake, but he should at least keep his cards close to his chest and play along, and then maybe plan to tell Robert secretly. He doesn't know yet that Robert gets killed in the hunt, so he should plan to tell Robert, right? If that's your plan, why would you telegraph your moves? That way, when Robert doesn't come back from the hunt, you're safe. It's just so agonizing in every way, and it's only agonizing the second read through, because the first read through you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And let me tell you guys a little bit of advice, ladies. Don't try to hit on a guy right after he found out you're screwing your brother. I'm just saying it's probably not going to do some damage to your ego. So there's that.
Yeah, not the biggest turn on, I guess.
Huh? Probably not.
No. And it's interesting too, because you see where Eddard Stark's principles get him, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but Martin is extremely good at like setting things up for future books. Eddard Stark's principles also brought about Daenerys' success, because he banished Jorah Mormont for engaging just in simple poaching. This guy is he was patriotic. He was a mostly like good, person for the realm, and yet you banish him for engaging in poaching. And Jorah is the one who helps Daenerys succeed. Like everything that Ned does on principle ends up stabbing him in the back, which is why Varys eventually says, you killed the king. Cersei didn't kill the king. It was your mercy. Isn't that what he said? It's your mercy that killed the king.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of rigidity to the people of the North, I guess, and or to the Starks, that doesn't serve them all that well in dealing with the Southern kingdoms, where they're a lot more conniving and so forth. So yeah,
for sure. And you can. Philip, you can stay as long as you want or bow out anytime you want. Totally up to you.
I'm actually about to say good evening to you, to the two of you. And once again, happy birthday to Mike.
Thank you.
It's great to see you, my friend. And
likewise. And we'll be doing the same thing for you here very soon.
Yeah.
It's the big one. We got to get on here. We got to like sing or something. It'll be great. Come on.
I was almost going to sing Today's Your Birthday by the Beatles, but you probably don't want to hear me do that. So
no, we've heard you sing. Don't fake it.
And Jordan can play the guitar and sing it probably. So
man, I hear I was talking about we having like a Zoom D&D game. Let's get a Zoom band together. That'd be really fun. Yeah,
that would be fun. Yeah,
for no one except us.
Well, who knows? But anyway. my best regards to you, gentlemen, and carry on. Have a great time. And once again, happy birthday, Mike.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Take care. Bye-bye, Jordan.
Bye, Philip. Thanks. So, Mike, was there anything that you disliked about the book? I meant to ask you that as well. Is it we're both such
first
ardent
read or
fanboys?
this read?
What's that?
First reading or this reading?
In any case, is there anything about the book, first reading or second reading, that you disliked?
I think about my first reading, because I never read anything kind of like this brutal. Some of the scenes where Viserys is just like abusing Daenerys really bothered me when I was younger. Now I'm like, yeah, it's how history was, you know. But I think about stuff like that. This time, no, really, I think it's as close to as perfect a book one as you can have. It's probably got the best ending of a book one in fantasy history ever. I mean, I can't think who's not grabbing book two immediately after reading that ending. But no, I mean, it's just things like where it's just like complaints about, I don't want the story to go this way. You know, I don't want Ned to do what he does, you know, that kind of thing. I don't want Bran to be permanently crippled, these things like that. But it's nothing with the storyline. I mean, these first three books, I have like zero complaints with any of it. Yeah, it is so good. And in fact, I originally gave this 4 stars because I filled out my Goodreads like long after I had read the book, and I was thinking, looking back, I was thinking, okay, well, I can't rate a Game of Thrones a 5 because look at Storm of Swords and look at A Clash of Kings. The other day I said, what am I doing, dude? These are all 5.
I know.
What are you doing?
So I just, when I reread this, I clicked, I finished, and then I clicked the 5 stars because I was like, that is a lie. It is a lie that this is 4 stars. This is absolutely 5 stars. And in fact, I was reading about something where the editors were talking about when George R.R. the publishers, the editors were talking about when George R.R. Martin actually submitted the book, and it was like Christmas time, and they were opening like champagne and celebrating because they were like, this book is so good, we're going to be rich and all of this stuff. And it was just really nice. Is there any, I'm trying to be not such an obsessive fanboy. Is there anything that we disliked? I'm going to be like the guy that is really obnoxious and says in the interview, when the interviewer says like, what's your worst quality? And the person who's being interviewed says like, well, my worst quality is that I'm obsessive about productivity and that I work too hard. I actually think that one of the things that's hard for me about this series is that reading Game of Thrones is kind of a sad feeling for me, and maybe I'll feel differently once I've read more. But there really isn't anything else out there in fantasy that's this good, in my opinion. So Martin's writing is so crisp. It's so good. Everything is where it should be in terms of quality. The world building is satisfying. It's intriguing. It's expertly devised. The politics are complex and nuanced and historically informed. The prose is better than any other fantasy writer, even Tolkien. And again, Tolkien is my favorite fantasy writer, but we mostly don't love him because he's like an amazing prose stylist. We love him because of what he accomplished, and he's the father of fantasy, and he did so much, and he was so well read, and he was a philologist, and so his world was so rich. Martin is the best writer in fantasy. So there's kind of, if there's anything I don't like about this series, it's the sadness that comes with knowing that George R.R. Martin is in his mid-70s. And I personally, and I know this is controversial, I don't feel like anyone
not on his side. Yes.
What's that?
Math wasn't on his side when A Dance with Dragons came out, guys.
Okay.
Not getting any younger.
Yeah.
Not getting healthier. So
I just wonder if there's ever going to be anyone who can reach this level of excellence in fantasy again. And again, remember, Mike, I haven't read Joe Abercrombie, so maybe he is the holy grail of all that's great in modern fantasy. I just haven't read it, so I couldn't say.
No, what I say is things like Faithful, The Fallen, things like First Law. I think if you're a fan of the series, there'll be series that you like. And like I said, before I started this reread, I started saying, why do I only have this list as my 3rd favorite fantasy series of all time? I haven't reread anything as much as I've read this, not even Lord of the Rings. I don't think anything has as deep of a world as this does. What is holding this back? And I literally said, it's just because of my butt hurt that the series isn't done yet, you know? And I was like, that really is not a reason. Just like people saying, oh, I don't want to read it because it's not done. I'm like, well, you're missing out. You really are. It's frustrating. And yeah, you'll have big old fantasy blue balls, but you know what? Your life's gonna be better for reading it because you're gonna be like, those books were freaking amazing.
I should put that on the thumbnail. Big old fantasy blue balls.
Yeah.
All right, time for 7 Kingdoms, 7 questions. Mike, are you ready for this? Are you ready?
I hope. I said that, I don't want anybody busting out the red pen and correcting me. So let's see if you can put me on the spot.
Of course not. 7 Kingdoms, 7 questions for the birthday boy. Your favorite character in Game of Thrones, not in the whole series, but in Game of Thrones.
I think it's got to be Tyrion, just because I don't know. I mean, who doesn't always say Tyrion with that? I just think when the first book is, you looked at this character who's usually, like either the sidekick or like the little evil gargoyle, the little minion or something, and he made something completely different with this character who can't obviously do anything physical, but the fact that he uses his mind and he's always thinking, he's like Batman, he's always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. So I think about that line about reading so much because keep his mind sharp. That's always something that's kind of really clicked for me. I always kind of still also with Sam too, but that's for a different story, different reason. But I really, it's got to be Tyrion, I think.
Yeah, for me, I guess Tyrion is like either second or third. I guess for me, it would be either Ned or Catelyn, and then Tyrion's in there as well, for sure. Just to say something different from you. Ned, because as agonizing as it is to watch him do what he does and watch what happens to him happen to him, I think that there's something to be said for the one guy who goes down trying to be good, the one guy who lives his life in an honorable way. And even his like quote unquote cowardly, like bend the knee, I was wrong, I agree, Joffrey, you're the king, I'm a traitor. He did that entirely for his children.
I do the same thing for my kids,
And he had minutes after he said that, and after he knew he was going to get his head chopped off, and he didn't like scream out, actually, I was lying, and you're a bastard. And no, he just like went down. He went down like a man. And he had so much valor and honor and courage and that kind of realness about him. And to be able to be like that in a world just full of snakes and backstabbers, Littlefinger saying, the worst thing that you could have done was trust me. And he was so vulnerable and trusting. And that's one of the things that you like about a person. It's like if Westeros was filled with Neds, Westeros would be a good place. It's like that. What is it from the Federalist Papers? I forget which Federalist paper it is, Publius. It's like if men were angels, then we wouldn't need government. Well, if everyone was Ned, then there would be no story. But that's why I like Ned, because would that more people could be like Ned and that sort of thing. And just Catelyn, because Martin does such a good job telling her POV and just that love and that anxiety and that fear she feels for her children and how much she loves her husband.
Reading this for the first time since I've had kids, I think I like Catelyn a lot more, for sure. Because I'm like, I would do the same thing. You're not thinking rationally when stuff like that happens with your children, guys. You are a maniac and you just want eye for an eye.
I know. All right, question 2. What is your favorite chapter or scene or just general part of the book? Like if you could pick like a part that you like the most.
There's several. Like I say, I always have to talk about that one Arya chapter just because I didn't think that was ever going to happen, that he was going to kill his main character off in the first.
That was my second choice. Yep.
But there's also some Tyrion chapters I like, basically where he's trying to get out of the situation he's in up at the area. I think that's some good stuff. I should have wrote down like chapter numbers or names, but everyone apparently has different ones, because I'll be like, I'm on Arya 3, and people are like, what chapters? I was like, I don't know, it's Arya 3. That's my book says Arya 3. So yeah. But apparently it depends on what edition you're reading of that. So I don't have like particular names, but I can tell you like what was happening. So some Tyrion chapters where he's trying to get out of stuff, or just when he's talking to Jon, all George are bastards in their father's eyes and stuff like that. Some really, really great stuff in those chapters. So yeah, I always just kind of gravitate towards Tyrion. But again, that Arya chapter, like I said, that changed fantasy for me. I was never expecting anything like that to ever happen.
Yeah, and that's like every Tyrion chapter too, right? Tyrion trying to get out of stuff, right? Trying to get out of being like decimated by these like these, you know, northern tribes and some of these people are genuinely scary, like Shaga, and who's just like plucking arrows out of himself, and he's like, whatever, it doesn't even matter. I got shot by some arrows. And the pink, what is it called? What are they called? The burn men? Tiamat, son of Tiamat, the burn men, and they're crazy. Yeah, the burn men, who are just the scariest people in the entire world, these tribes. And as you pointed out, like Tyrion trying to get out of that situation in the Eyrie, and just like getting out of stuff with his intelligence, right? I'll tell you, my favorite chapter, Mike, is a very idiosyncratic, probably a chapter that no one else would pick, but it's the chapter where Varys visits Ned in prison and brings him wine and basically informs him that he fucked up and that he's totally doomed and that his mercy killed the king, not Cersei. I love that whole chapter. There are probably between 8 and 10 quotable lines in that chapter that just knock it out of the park. And it's got this great pacing where Ned is getting increasingly drunk on wine as Varys just schools him and tells him more and more about what's going on in the realm. And he tells Ned that his wife Catelyn lost the imp, so she has nothing to bargain with, and that his 15-year-old son is marching south valiantly with a host at his back, but that Cersei is actually not really afraid of him, but she's more afraid of Stannis and Renly than his son or the River Lords. And it's at this point that we get a glimpse for the first time of Stannis, and he is a scary dude. And Varys says something like, no one is as truly terrifying as a just man, or something like that. And then Varys basically has to sit there and try to convince Ned to bend the knee. I just love that whole chapter because I love the smoky backroom politics and all of this kind of scheming and stuff like that. And if I had to pick a second one, it would definitely be the Arya one.
No, that's a great one for the Varys chapter, because everybody always wants to credit all the best lines of Tyrion, but I was like, Varys has got some bangers, man. He really does.
Yeah, there's so many good ones there in that one. Number 3, what are your favorite scenes from the book that the TV show doesn't show? Like, what do you feel that the show leaves out that the book does well, that the show should have included, but it didn't?
That I never liked what they did with the Hound and Sansa on the TV show, because that was an interesting relationship in the book. And in this one, there's a scene where basically he's the one who tells her, you know, the background with Gregor, what happened to his face and all that stuff. And then on the show, it's like Littlefinger like creepily whispering into her ear. I'm like, who would talk about this to a 14-year-old girl right now, you know, at this show? That one, I also, that Brendan Tolley was at the Eyrie and he didn't come in the show till much later. I love the Blackfish, and I think Catelyn having the scene with her dad with Hoster Tolley, that was really touching too. And I don't think that ever happened on the show. I don't remember it, but it didn't happen in season 1. And then you got little things like the Targaryen having blue eyes and the Dothraki wearing the bells in their hair and stuff like that. That's just little nitpicks.
Yeah, those are good choices, definitely, for sure. I liked a lot of the war strategy stuff that the book includes that the show just can't do. Yeah. And I think it's really well done. In my opinion, the show doesn't do enough of it, I guess. The show
didn't have that budget in season 1, so Tyrion just gets knocked out instead of
I know. I know, that's true. And you really can't fault them. The casual viewer doesn't really want what I want. The show is going to focus much more on the family rivalries, the relationships, the political intrigue, the sort of Shakespearean drama of it all, which is to be expected. But the book actually gives you the battle strategies. You get to be with Robb and his bannermen as they're strategizing what they're going to do. You get to be with Tywin and Sir Kevin and everyone else as they're deciding how they're going to take on the Starks moving south. And you do get a little bit of that in the show for sure, but in my opinion, not enough. But that's the thing, like they know what sells. And I was going to say one other thing too, is I feel like Jon's friendship and deep feeling and sympathy for Samwell Tarly is actually done a little bit better in the book.
Oh, sure.
It's done well in the show, right?
It's quick on the show, though. It's just like,
it's quick on the show.
Why is he doing this? Yeah.
and correct me if I'm wrong, you're like way more of an expert, but so I'm just wondering, in the show, I forget, because it's been a little while. In the show, because in the book, John goes to one of the maesters.
Yeah,
it's either
that he doesn't do that on the show.
He doesn't do that on the show, and he like
convinces him to let Sam take the black. Yeah, say the words. Yeah, that's not in the show. Yeah, he just
and I was gonna say too. Yeah, I was gonna say too. I thought the Sirio Farrell scene was even better in the book, and I feel like you got to see Sirio Farrell first sort of bravos when I don't know if when the Lannister men come for him. When things are really getting thick, right? You actually get to see the full fight, and it's just yeah.
No, the thing about Sirio is like when I watched the show, I was like, that's not how I imagined Sirio like at all. But that guy was great.
Yeah,
he was great in a short role. But yeah. I mean, when I say to people, it's like no matter how good an adaptation is, I think the book is almost always better. And in this case, it's like, I mean, it's about as faithful as an adaptation as they could have made, honestly. Because I'm rewatching it now that I finished the book. I think we finished episode 7 last night, so we're pretty close there. But
yeah, for sure.
Better to read the book.
Yeah, for sure. Your favorite quote or quotes from the book, if there are any lines that you just think are really evocative or interesting.
I mean, they're both going to be Tyrion lines, obviously. I love the never forget what you are. For surely the world will not make it your strength, and they can never be your weakness. Arm yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you. I mean, that's just a mantra that you should take to heart. And of course, as a big time reader who always had people ask me, why do you read so much? My brother has a sword, King Robert has a warhammer, and I have my mind. And a mind needs book as a sword needs a whetstone if it's to keep its edge. That is why I read so much, Jon Snow.
Love that.
Perfect.
That's brilliant. That's beautiful. Very good. Two really good quotes there.
And then every line that Varys says.
Every line that Varys says. Okay, I'll do a Varys one. Right. Here's one I like. Each man has a role to play in life as well as mummery. So it is at court. The king's justice must be fearsome. The master of coin must be frugal. The lord commander of the king's guard must be valiant. And the master of whisperers must be sly and obsequious and without scruple. The courageous informer would be as useless as a cowardly knight. Ned studied the eunuch's face, searching for truth beneath the mummer's scars and false stubble. So I find that really interesting at the end, where Ned is still searching for truth behind these whisperers' faces. Like even in the end, he's still searching for truth in Littlefinger's words. He's still searching for truth in Varys's words, and he's still trusting them, and he still doesn't get it. And Varys is telling him, man to man, face to, or eunuch to man, whatever you want to call it, face to face, this is what you did wrong. This is how you fucked up. I like you. You're a good man, but you have to make certain moves when it comes to politics. And you left the North and you joined, now you're the king's hand. And the rules are different. And to go along with that, I wanted to add to that Littlefinger's quote, you wear your honor like a suit of armor, Stark. You think it keeps you safe, but all it does is weigh you down and make it hard for you to move. Look at you now. You know why you summoned me here. You know what you want to ask me to do. You know it has to be done, but it's not honorable. So the words stick
in your
throat. And the last one I'll share with you is the famous one, because and again, it's one of those things where it sounds cliche now because you read it from the show and it has all these associations. But when Martin wrote this, it wasn't cliche and you hadn't heard it. And it's when Cersei says, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
That's why when the show was coming out and they named it just Game of Thrones, I was like, they're going to market the hell out of that line. And then they first came out with Winter is Coming. I was like, maybe they're not. And then it was, you win or you die. I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes those lines are cliche for a reason, guys, because they're just that good. But what I like about that Varys quote that you brought up is he basically just told the reader, this is how the world actually works here without it sounding like exposition. And I think that's something he does so great is he can build his world with exposition, but it sounds like something someone would actually say in a conversation, not like, hey, this is like that one time that you did this, like out of nowhere. It actually makes sense. Like, I mean, after you read Fire and Blood and you go back and read this, right afterwards, and they're making all these references to stuff that's in Fire and Blood, like in casual conversation. And when you have that context, it's like so much cooler. So read Fire and Blood, guys.
Yeah, for sure. And there was one more too, and this is like not a line that anyone would pick, but it hit me so hard because because it was the moment. It's the one moment where everything begins to turn and change. It's like that term volta in poetry. It's the shift in the story where Eddard is basically fucked. And he thinks he's being so clever, and he thinks he's catching Cersei out, but he doesn't understand the game yet. And she says, I don't remember what it is. She says something about my brother's away or something like that. And he says, your brother or your lover? I don't remember what she says, but his response is, he thinks he's so clever, your brother or your lover. That's it. He's dead. At that very moment, he's dead. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's dead. And he says something about, well, the king's wrath, and you're going to have to, I have mercy for you. So I'm going to make plans for you to go to like the Summer Isles or whatever the hell he wants to send her. And she's like, no, you don't understand. You need to be worried about my wrath.
Yeah.
My wrath.
So the epiphany he has when where Sansa says, I want to marry Joffrey and give him golden haired babies. And he's like, light bulb. And the thing is like, everyone's like, oh, I kind of figured that out. I didn't figure it out what was going on the first time. So I didn't figure it out right until he revealed it to Cersei right there in the book. So I don't know. I think he wrote that quite well, because I didn't realize
that book.
He had said, that he had like that epiphany when she said that. And I went back like this time, like reading that line, I'm like, I think I was confused about something else. Like, I don't know why that didn't click to me the first time I read it, that, oh, okay, so those aren't Robert's kids, but it's really obvious when you reread it, talking about black of hair all the time,
Well, that was the problem, because I watched the show first. Yeah. And so I knew for sure.
Like I said, I'm always a along for the ride reader. I'm not trying to figure these things out. So yeah. No.
Yeah. So Mike, at this point, I wanted to give you a message. There were a slew of people who are going to show up, but Christopher Rocchio might still show up. Oh, okay. He was doing a grout with his father, and there was this accident with it, and now he has to spend like hours cleaning it up. So he's really upset, and he might pop in here. But if he does, it'll be in the next couple of minutes. And then Joanna wanted so badly to come on, but she's on a trip back home and will still be in the car for another few minutes, so she can't make it either. And then Madison, I guess, is on a flight, and she just sent me a message wishing I was chatting a Game of Thrones with you boys tonight instead of sitting in the disgusting Dallas airport. Lol, y'all have fun. Can't wait to watch it. And she wanted to wish you a happy birthday. And Joanna wished you a happy birthday as well. And there were a bunch of other people that couldn't make it that wish you a happy birthday as well. So we'll see if they pop in here in the last couple of minutes. But I wanted to get to. So that's cool. That's cool. You got a lot of fans here, a lot of supporters here with us. What number 5? Was there a moment in the book, I'm curious, Mike, that really struck you, given that you've read the full series, like rereading this book? Was there ever a moment where you were like, oh geez, in a Game of Thrones, I know what's coming, but the characters don't know? So the formal term for this is dramatic irony, where you come across something, and because you've read all the books, you're like, oh shit. And was there a moment where that just kind of stopped your heart in terms of like, what's going to happen, but the characters don't, which is the definition of dramatic irony?
Absolutely. When they're like, I don't like this look that Roose Bolton keeps giving me. Yeah, that should be your first warning sign. So I don't want to spoil for anybody who hasn't read past this book yet, but just know that right there, I was just like, oh my God, will you do something about this guy? So yeah. I mean, the warning signs are all there.
I know, they're like, Roose Bolton scares the absolute shit out of me. But you know what?
I'll turn my back to him in a battle.
Yeah, like Big John. No, we can't trust him. He's fearless, but like he's not Roose Bolton, who's really smart. Although Roose Bolton gives me the chills, and he's kind of a sicko, and he freaks me out. But definitely he should be leading. It's just, yeah. And then after the battle, it's like, where did Roose Bolton go? Oh, he escaped. Well, of course he did. Of course he did.
Had to go flay somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. For me, it was definitely, Mike, it was the Walder Frey. Just the entire Walder Frey thing, as he's sitting there just like toying with Catelyn like he's a cat and she's a mouse. And she's just like, and John and Rob's like, yeah, I'll marry one of his daughters. That sounds great, and that definitely gave me the chills, knowing what was coming. So number 6, I'm curious, what is your, I think we kind of already talked about this, your 0 through 5 star rating for Game of Thrones, and why. I was going to ask you what your official rating for this was, maybe on Goodreads or whatever.
Well, originally, I had it for 4 because I used the same logic. Well, Storm of Swords is my favorite, and it's a 5. So I can't, because they don't do half-star ratings on there. But this one I was like, what are you doing? These first 3 books are just damn near perfect. Give them all 5s. So yeah. I'd probably give 4 and 5, maybe. Maybe I do 4 on those. But again, doing this reread, I might be like, no, you're being stupid, So.
Yeah, I just can't believe this first book in a series is this good. And I had to go back and give it a 5. So, okay, then last question, regardless of your answer to the question I just asked you, what is your favorite book then in the Song of Ice and Fire world, and why?
Well, Storm of Swords is the perfect fantasy book. I think it's one of those books where every single character gets some kind of arc resolution. It feels like the end of like the first arc. That's because, my wife still has a theory this was originally meant to be a trilogy, and George has even joked about his 7-book trilogy or whatever. But I think it's just because it's just so many satisfying moments in that book that feel like it ties up a lot of loose ends, but obviously the story was able to keep going. But yeah, really, it's just, you get this, it's really just a buildup of all these things for these characters, and they get a satisfying arc in that book that started in book 1. And it can continue, obviously. But I don't know, like I said, if people were reading this for the first time and they only want to read those first 3, I think you'll be satisfied. I really do. I think that you'll have enough of a resolution where you'll feel like, okay, some things, obviously not a happy resolution, which we just kind of like, foreshadowed a little bit. But, I think that you get so many rewarding moments in that 3rd book, and it's just perfectly paced, and it's massive. It's massive compared to this book. And it's just so good. I mean, you can't stop turning the pages as much as it is breaking your heart many, many times. But yeah, ups and downs. But it's just, again, you're making me gun to head pick one singular fantasy book ever. Storm of Swords is my favorite.
Yeah, I'm like 100% with you. And I was going to say book 2 because you've got the turmoil and the whole civil war going on with the 7 kingdoms, with Joffrey and Robert's brothers. And
awesome. Yeah,
it's so awesome. And Robb Stark and the Greyjoys. You've got
the overarching Stannis, who is the Manus,
Yeah, I know. And there's so much drama and there's so much intrigue, and everything's just building and building. You've got everything with the Night's Watch and the wildlings, and in the background you've got Daenerys Targaryen, who is like hatching her long game to conquer the 7 kingdoms. But definitely for me, it's going to be Storm of Swords, and it is just because, in my opinion, Storm of Swords, as you said, is the best modern fantasy novel. It is at least the best fantasy novel so far in the 21st century, probably the best fantasy novel since Tolkien. It's got absolutely everything in it, and it's just absolutely wonderful. Can't say enough good things about it.
I get to ask you a question to close it out?
Sure.
What's your unpopular Song of Ice and Fire opinion? That I guess isn't really too spoilery after this. What's your unpopular opinion? I'll tell you mine. Mine is that you guys can quit your complaining, quit your griping, whatever. Stannis is the one true king. You need to bend the knee there. Boom.
That's a great unpopular opinion, because
look, sometimes it doesn't have to be sexy for it to be right. I think you be a firm but fair ruler. Okay.
Yeah, well, that was that whole quote that I think it was Varys who was saying that the scariest person is a truly just man, and that it's his firmness and his rigidity and how kind of scary he is. I'm kind of with you on that. It's a really interesting take.
I don't know whoever first said it. You've always heard the person who doesn't want to rule should be the person. Stannis looks at this as his duty. He doesn't want the throne for the power. He looks at it as his duty, and it is his duty to take over for his brother and rule the 7 kingdoms in the way that.
And Stannis is a hard man. He is a hard man. That man is a boss.
Approaches his bedchamber as if it's war.
Well, I guess the only hesitation I would have there, and again, this is hindsight is 2020 problems here, is that when I read this novel, this first novel, I was feeling that. I was feeling exactly what you said. I was thinking in my mind, why not Stannis? Why not Stannis? And then I was starting to think about his interactions with the Red Lady, with Melisandre, and how susceptible he was, and how easy it was for a kind of dark sorceress to kind of worm into his mind and just
George, I can tell you from experience, when a hot redhead tells you do something, you probably listen. Okay,
I'm married to a hot redhead, and so you and I and Stannis, we have the same problems.
We are Stan
Stan I know, in the redheads, they're wily, they're fierce, and they're loyal too, and you just can't help but, I know it's so tough. My controversial opinion, I'm trying to think of one. My controversial opinion. Okay, I guess this would just be in general about, in terms of like what people think about the series in general, is I legitimately think that fantasy writers, and Martin especially, I think fantasy writers are perfectly within their rights and within the proper order of things and bounds to, if they want their fantasy world to be a brutal, hard medieval world in which things were like they were in medieval times, in which after war, the things that have always happened after war happen after wars, in which lords and men do what they do. I think that fantasy writers are perfectly within their bounds to write about that reality. And I think if we forget about that reality, we're in danger of returning to it. So in fact, I think that it's good that Martin sets his story in a medieval world, and he stays true to that. And he is not, infusing what we would want things to have been like today. I call this hindsight is 2020 chauvinism, where you have the privilege of looking back from 2020 and judging people from a really long time ago. They didn't have that luxury because they were ensconced in the milieu that they were a part of. And in fact, who knows, in 50 years, how many of the things that we do today will people think are barbaric? I won't mention any of them, but there are certain things that, you could argue that in 100 years, people will look back and say, I can't believe you guys did that. That's crazy. And so to come at medieval times from 2020 and to expect it to live up to what we have now is rendering the past an inadequate version of the present. And I think that that's an impoverished way to write about the past. And that's what Martin deliberately says he's doing, and more power to him. And I hope he keeps doing it until he dies.
I'm with you.
That's you asked for a controversial take, so that's mine.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's what makes it feel authentic. That's like what Philip said. You feel like you're transported to another world. This feels like the history of something that actually happened in another planet. That's what makes it great. And not putting your wish fulfillment into it, because people are like, oh, why are your books so dark, so violent, so visceral? It's like, because that's what history was. We weren't civilized human beings back then. That's just the way that things were. The strong got stronger. That's just kind of how it was. So,
and that is how, and I think it was Philip that mentioned this, referencing the Tolkien, or was it, what is it, Ursula Le Guin essay he was referencing. That is why Martin's able to transport us to another world, because there's nothing in this book that takes you out of it. There's nothing in this book that you go, wait a minute, would people ensconced
talking about the Gulf War? Yeah, no, you never.
Yeah. I mean, he's just so good at what he does, and he's clearly read so much. And even the language that he employs, it's very readable, but it also feels medieval. He's like, John is a man grown now, mayhaps on his
14th name day.
And he's so good at doing it. It never feels like cosplay. It never feels like he's LARPing, that is a different age. It really actually feels like you're in that time. And he's so good at just kind of, just lifting you off and into another world. And that's the beauty of fantasy for me, at least. So
I am with you. I'm with you. So yeah.
Mike, happy birthday.
Thank you. When do you plan to do Clash of Kings?
As soon as I finish it. So if you want to talk again about Clash of Kings, what am I calling this? I forget now what I've called this. Knights of the Mind. If you want to join the round table for Knights of the Mind for a Clash of Kings, I would love to have you.
Sure, we can do all of them. I think right now I don't plan to get to it till next month, but I didn't plan to get to this one as quick as I did. So who knows what can happen.
Well, so that's a good thing, because I'm supposed to be having a chat about Sword and Citadel with Christopher Rocchio in like a week, Mike. So I've got to read that first, and then maybe I'll get to Clash of Kings after that, and maybe with enough pestering, you'll do something with me on that, maybe in early September or something. I don't know.
Anytime, man. I can always talk about this world. So I try to tell people, they're like, why are you talking about it so much? I was like, because I didn't talk about it for like 3 years on my channel, because everyone was like, the TV show. And I feel like we can finally talk about it again, So
yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure to have you. Happy birthday. We all love and appreciate you. And thank you for building this community, and thank you for doing what you do. And there were like 3 or 4 other people who said they were stopping in, but I've been getting little pings that have said, oh, goodness gracious, something happened.
It's not a big
life gets in the way. So
the thought that counts,
I appreciate you, man. And thanks for being on.
Likewise.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.